Agenda-setting financial insight now with our commentary on Reuters Breaking Views. Today's top picks. Well, why the IMF looks less wrong on bank capital than Europe, why the Eurozone should slow down on austerity as the threat of recession rises, and what happens when underwriting is not underwriting. Well, with me now to discuss these stories is Reuters Breaking Views Assistant Editor Chris Hughes. Chris, thanks for being with us. Let's get straight down to this IMF story. I mean, hardly a surprise. You guys have said right from the outset that €2.5 billion, as calculated by the EBA, is nonsense.
Yeah, look, this row sort of brews up every year when the IMF does its own sort of stability report. We're there again, IMF versus EU, IMF being very bearish, EU saying, oh, nothing to worry about, actually you've done your sums wrong. Now look, probably both sides are a bit wrong here, right? And as we know, the market's already made up its own mind. So let's not put too much emphasis on this row, but it's important, and we are taking a side, if you like, and we're saying that probably the IMF is looking the less wrong here. You know, it does appear to be closer to where the market is than Europe, and the rather sort of blasé response of, oh well, they've got their sums wrong is a little bit worrying in terms of the way that the Eurozone is looking at this. So you know, it does flare up every year, but you know, for what it's worth, we're with the IMF on it. You're with the IMF,
and your calculation yourself is somewhere in the region of 90 billion or more is likely to be needed, right?
Yeah, it moves around. It moves around a bit, but we're definitely a lot more bearish than the EBA stress tests.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to come back to banks in Europe in a little while for the last story. The second one, though, Eurozone should slow down on austerity. I mean, people who are regular viewers of this show might be detecting something of a flip-flop here. I mean, we have sat in this chair and you guys have been arguing that Europe should be following Britain down the path of austerity. Britain's getting it right. Now Europe's slowing down. Why the change of heart?
It's a good question, Nick. Look, we're not saying, look, let's let up on austerity altogether. But we are saying, look, let's not push it too far. And let's think about what exactly needs to be done for these economies. Let's think about structural reform. This has been prompted by Portugal really going the extra mile in terms of cutting. But what we want to see as well is an emphasis on structural reforms that really put these economies on a surer footing over the longer term. And with growth being weak, you know, we are prepared to modify our position and say that, you know, you've got to weigh into the mix. You know, you've got to think about exactly what you're doing to these economies and the effect on growth. Now, look, we are not at all giving a green light to sort of relaxing austerity altogether, not at all. But we are saying you've got to think about just how far you push it and whether, you know, you are giving any kind of breathing space to long-term structural reform. Now, in Portugal's case, it looks like what they're doing is they're putting it all the emphasis on cuts, and we'd like to see more in terms of structural reform. So it's a modified position.
Modified, nuanced, yeah. So everyone's going to say, well, does this mean you got it wrong?
No, not at all. As I say, we're very much in the view that austerity is absolutely crucial. What we're saying is, don't push it too far, and don't forget the needed structural reforms. So no, it's quite consistent.
No dogma there. Okay, right. Greek banks, our final story. So other banks don't want to underwrite a rights issue. This is the core of what's going on here. I mean, why is that anything of a surprise when Greek banks have essentially been forced to finance themselves via the central banks for months now?
Well, look, clearly underwriting a Greek bank rights issue is a risky proposition. Just look at the volatility of the shares. I mean, you know, volatility is a key, you know, aspect of any underwriting decision. You know, so okay, it's a volatile situation. Greek banks clearly risky enterprises, right? But it's actually, in the grand scheme of things, so the four big banks involved here, you know, we're talking about sharing a commitment of 1.25 billion euros. The deal here, the merger, actually clearly creates value, and it's very odd that they can't actually, you know, agree with the client on a price and a discount at which to do this. It's the job of investment banks to take risk, not just to underwrite sort of easy equity issues where, you know, you take 3.5%, you do it at 50% discount. It's their job to provide a service, to underwrite risk in difficult situations. It's a difficult situation, but what's their function otherwise?
Well, so then is the point here, in fact, more to do with the capital position of the underwriting banks rather than the state of the Greek banking sector?
I'm not sure it is. This is, I say, spread out. This is still sort of pretty, small commitment. We've seen much bigger equity underwriting commitments in the past, So it just seems to be a sort of it's reflective of extreme risk aversion. And look, clearly, as I say, this is a very, very difficult situation. But it's still surprising that it's not possible to find a price at a discount where this commitment can be taken. I mean, it's the function of investment banks to provide that service. And yet when it's really needed, when the underwriting commitment really matters, strangely, they're not there.
Failing in core functions. That can't be allowed to happen. Chris, thanks for being with us. That, of course, was Chris Hughes. Well, for more agenda-setting financial insight, do watch our US Breaking Views programme every day. That's at 12:30 Eastern, 17:30 here in London. I'm Nick Edwards, and this is Reuters.